Welcome to the Published Author Podcast, where we help entrepreneurs learn how to write a book and leverage it to grow their business and make an impact. I'm your host, Josh Steimle. Today, my guest is Jose Palomino. Jose is the founder of Value Prop Interactive, which he started over 15 years ago. He's also the creator of the Revenue Throughput system, a process that diagnoses the volume and velocity at which a business converts opportunities into revenue. He's an adjunct professor of marketing with the Villanova University MBA program, or if I'm pronouncing it correctly, I'll say Villanova University MBA program, but us Americans, we'd say Villanova.
Yep.
And he's the author of Value Prop, creating powerful I3 value propositions to enter and win new markets. Jose, welcome to the show.
Oh, Josh, glad to be here.
So first of all, tell us a little bit about your background, where you come from, how you got into entrepreneurship and business, and then we'll get into a little bit of the backstory of the book too.
Sure. No, great. So I started my business, Value Prop Interactive, about 15 years ago, after what had been probably like a 20 plus year career arc, mostly in sales and marketing, mostly in technology. And moving from actually doing technology, hands-on software developer, project manager, moving into sales roles and then eventually marketing roles. So that's kind of a classic technology, Silicon Valley kind of story. Born and raised New Yorker. So I'm a New Yorker living outside of Philly, as I like to say right now. So I'm in the burbs outside of Philadelphia. And one of the things I noticed, though, in the last corporate gig I did was with a company called Yankee Group that was a competitor to Gartner and to Forrester, and they sold syndicated market research to large companies. And I handle their IT leadership accounts for the company globally. So I handle IBM, Accenture, those type of companies. And what really struck me was just how siloed the disciplines of strategy, marketing, and sales were in those large organizations. And I said, there's an opportunity there to do something that synergizes those a little bit better. And I had a vision for that. And that led me to starting Value Prop. Now, once I started the company, I ended up gravitating, although I've done over the years a number of large corporate gigs, toward the middle market, small owner-led businesses, not purely entrepreneurial in that they're not startups anymore. They're like $5 to $20 million in revenue. But there, the challenges of strategy, marketing, and sales weren't one of they're not synergized enough. They were just not developed enough. They just kind of like, it's a day-to-day kind of thing. I'm not saying they're a lifestyle business, but they don't have the headspace or the time space to really think big questions necessarily. They're thinking about the trade show schedule for next year. They're thinking about pricing at their biggest customer, squeezing them on. They're thinking of maybe hiring one more sales rep to add to the two they have on staff. So I loved getting into that world. And the work I did to synergize strategy, marketing, and sales was really like ideal for that small to mid-market company where they needed a way to look at things systemically, tying those things together. So that's kind of the genesis of how I got to where I am. And that's where I'm very happy serving that market now as a consultant and coach.
And so what is the I3 in your book title? I'm curious about that. Creating powerful
Sure.
I3 value propositions.
Right. So value proposition often gets conflated with tagline. And what we talk about and what I write about and wrote about in the book and what working with clients now, really look at we say a value proposition is the true truth of why your offering is relevant to a particular audience to solve a particular problem. But while you may solve a particular problem for a particular audience, that still didn't differentiate you because there may be other competitors or alternatives for that customer to solve the same problem through other means. So we say how you have to stand out. You have to have an I3 value proposition. It's 3 I's. The first I is it has to be innovative for that market. So innovation is very relative. So not everything has to be Apple iPhone innovation level, although we use that as an example in the book at the time. But innovative, you're bringing some new ideas, something fresh to the market. So when a prospect says, they can solve my problem and they're doing it a bit differently than what I've seen before, that catches their attention. The second is it has to be indispensable. And we say that utility over time divided by the hassle factor, meaning anything could be better, but if it costs me too much money, or if it costs me too much time, or if I have to retrain my entire team. So you tell me you have, let's say, I have a proposal generation software platform, but it's going to require 6 months of training for anyone to know how to use it. That's not indispensable. It's only indispensable if it's relatively easy to take on that new capability. That's the second I. And the third I is a more subtle one, and it's inspirational. It's not just new, but it's exciting. Now that's all relative, right? So if you've ever seen, and if you have friends who are in some very technical trade, like an electrician or a plumber for that matter, they might look at a set of pipes and go, man, that's awesome. And you're thinking, I don't know, I'm seeing pipes. I mean, what's the big deal? But in the trade that you market in, especially in B2B, is what you're doing, the way you're doing it, something that might excite somebody in the space in how you solve the problem. That elegance, that little bit of wow factor. So we say the first one to be innovative is to be net new, indispensable is to be net useful, and inspirational is to be net wow. If you can shape a value proposition to solve a particular problem for a particular audience that has those three elements, you will have differentiated your promise to the market and actually grab people's attention in a different way than if you don't do those things.
And this is tough work, though, because I'm thinking about some of my businesses. I'm thinking about businesses I work with. Like you take, like, for example, a PR agency. How do you take PR and make it all those things? Because it's such a standard industry. Everybody does it the same way. You have to come up with something new and a different way of doing it. And that can be tough to figure out.
Oh, it can be brutal to figure out. But I'll tell you where the hooks are often a little bit easier, especially for smaller companies. I always tell a small company in a very commoditized category, exactly what you're describing, right? So you're doing something good, you do good work. But we say, you know what? You actually can think about and redesign the service experience to be different. There's no reason you can't do that. And you look at something as common as air travel, right? So everybody, if you're an airline, that's nothing more commoditized than that. It's literally a seat on a steel tube that goes from point A to point B. And if you go on Expedia, most tend to gravitate their fares roughly to the same level, more or less, for the same flight miles, point to point. No difference there. But yet people do find differences. For example, I won't fly anywhere that Southwest, let me say it differently. If Southwest is going where I'm going, I'm on Southwest. Now, how do they do that? Well, they thought through a few things. They said, well, how seats are assigned. I wonder if there's anything we can do about that. Seats are the same seats, right? 3 on one side, 3 on the other. You still have to get in through 2 doors. It's still a plane with all that entails. And yet they found a way to create that queuing system of when you bought your ticket, you get an A ticket, then you get a B. They even let you upgrade for a small fee, not crazy, to become an A ticket. And if you're an A ticket, like I love aisles, I can be sure to get the aisle seat no matter what. Or if I'm an A, because it's only A1 through 32, I think it is in most planes. That's a little service dimension that it was new, is innovative. In fact, it's so innovative, no one's copied it yet, which is amazing to me that the other airlines don't do the same thing. It's indispensable because I know when I fly Southwest, I will always get an aisle seat. And it's the first few times I did it, I mean, now it's just normal for me, but it was like, this is pretty cool. This is like so easy. Why hasn't everyone else thought about this? And you go time and again, you see competitive spaces, and I'll get to your PR agency idea in a moment, but Disney. I often wonder when I go to any other amusement park with my kids when they were growing up, I say, why don't they just send somebody with a clipboard and a camera and copy what Disney does for queuing? Like, it's just obviously the best in the world. It's not a state secret. You don't need a patented technology to create the lines that work well and make it comfortable for people to wait for 2 hours to get on a ride. And yet no one else copies them. So that's the other thing. That's it's think about things that maybe, and I like to ask it this way: what would your customers love if you could do it? So if you're a PR agency, what does a customer most want? Just whatever that is. And a hint, best way to find out is ask your customers. Like, what would you most want? Let's stipulate for the moment that we are a good PR firm and we can get you placed in the right journals, periodicals, and so on. What else would make this a better experience for you? And they might tell you it's something as simple as, well, I would love to be able to see a daily flash report in my email. I don't want to have to log into a portal, see what it is. I also don't want vanity metrics. I want to know, I want to tie it back to what actually happened. Did I get did the phone ring or whatever? I don't, all the particulars for PR firms, a little bit, I've used them, worked with them, but I'm not a PR firm. But you start thinking about what would delight a customer in the service dimension if you're a smaller company. That is to say, you're not a Fortune 500 company. You can, I think, find many ways to differentiate in that category of just how you engage, just the engagement. If we stipulate everyone can get the placements and the competitive set you're in. The other is, and I've seen this successfully with another PR firm I was affiliated with, they super niched into a sub market and they went really deep. And that is what set them apart for their market. And so I think there are many opportunities to find ways to do that, but it is hard work to go back to your original point.
But it's a great suggestion. If you're not sure what it is, just ask the customer. They might give you the golden idea, right? So I'm curious, did you apply this formula to your books when you were writing your books as well?
It's interesting. So when I wrote the first book and the one that's still our cornerstone book, Value Prop, I was finishing up my MBA at Villanova. And so one of the things I did is I said, okay, I wasn't sure yet who would be my direct target audience. Would it be corporate marketers like CMOs, or would it be owner operators? Thankfully, I had a lab in my class, my classmates, who represented a pretty good cross section. So one of our projects, we had to do some sort of leadership project, and I asked the professor if I could make my book be the presentation, because I wanted to ask them some direct questions about this. And sure enough, I got an hour of airtime with fellow MBA candidates who were like from all kinds of companies and walks of life. And I got a chance to really just say, hey, what is your challenge when you're trying to find or work on differentiation within your companies? And what would help you? And what do you think would make a book interesting? So there was one, a very good friend of mine who was a number 2 guy at the number 2 software company at the time on the planet Earth. So that's as far as I'll go. So I asked him, I said, John, can I give you my manuscript? And my manuscript was actually all my thinking on go-to-market, including the topic or the chapter or chapters on value propositions. And I gave it to him. It was like a 400-page book, right? And he's a good friend. And he said, Jose, what part of this do you want me to read? Clear. He wasn't going to read all 400 pages. And it hit me. I said, this is a guy who gets on a plane from like Philly to Boston to Chicago, and he likes to read a book on that flight. He doesn't want to have to go around the world to read the book. Okay. And so that was really great. And I started confirming that with other folks. And I also interviewed about 100 business leaders in developing the book content. And I started asking questions around length. And they said they'd rather something that has a narrow focus on a particular topic that they could get into. Not that saying they can't read big books or they can't have like a good to great or something like that, but they found very greater utility, indispensability, right? Utility over time in something that would focus on one discipline that they could really center in on. And that's what I focused on. So yes, I applied a lot of these principles to my book. Again, it was early stage. So a lot of it was a lot more experimentation. Early stage. It'd be a little different than if I was bringing a book to market, which I will be next year. That I have a broader base to work with, and I can be even more scientific on that.
Really interesting. I love how you talk about getting the feedback from your audience there, and how the feedback was, hey, this book's too big. You got to make a smaller book, because that's really valuable. And this has come up with a few other people that I've talked to, that there's a market for the book that can be read during an airline flight. In fact, there's even there's a publisher. They're called, I'll have to go back and get the name. I'll put it in the show notes. They specialize in publishing books that are short. And on the cover, it actually says, this will take 45 minutes to read. This will take 90 minutes to read.
Okay.
The idea being, hey, if you're going on a flight and you know it's going to be an hour and a half, you can grab one of their books and you know exactly what you're in for in terms of the time that it's going to take to read. And it seems like we're seeing a lot more condensed education in books these days, because, I mean, we're all busy, and I love reading. I mean, I read all these books. I love to read, even big books, but sometimes I'll grab a small book and I'll just say, hey, I can just fit this in right now. I'm going to read this real quick. And it's just easier to read a short book.
And there's books that are actually two books hidden in one. Like, a book that comes to mind is Tim Ferriss years ago wrote The 4-Hour Workweek, right? The irony there is he's like the hardest working man in business, right? But anyway, he wrote The 4-Hour Workweek. And the first half of that book really was inspiring about how to think about efficiencies. As an entrepreneur, it's a great read. The second half tried to be more of like a handbook on how to do all the stuff. And a lot of that got dated very quickly. The first half is still a very good book. If the first half was its own idea, it would have been a great idea book by itself. And again, Tim doesn't need my advice. He's a very successful book. So what do I know? But that was my takeaway. And the other one was Blue Ocean Strategy, which came out like maybe 15 years ago. And that's very much closer into my space of differentiation and so on. The first half of the book, very thoughtful around big concepts. When they got into the practicum side on the back end, not as useful, in my opinion. So sometimes it's just they wanted to hit. I'm not accusing them of anything. I'm just saying it's easy to want to hit. I want a big hardcover from Harvard Business Press because that feels good. When in fact, what you have is maybe two thoughts, and those would be better served as two segments, in my opinion. At least that's the approach I took.
Quick break here. Are you an entrepreneur? Do you want to write a book that will help you grow your business? Visit publishedauthor.com, where we have programs to fit every budget, programs that will help you write and publish your book in as little as 90 days, starting at just $39 per month. Or if you're too busy to write your book, we'll interview you and then write and publish your book for you. Don't let the valuable knowledge and experience you have go to waste. Head on over to publishedauthor.com to get the help you need to become a published author. You've already waited long enough. Do it today. Now, back to the show. Now, when you started your business, did you already have an idea for a book in mind, or was this something that came up after you already started?
No, after I already started.
Value Prop Interactive.
Yeah. So the original name for Value Prop was G2M Group, which stood for Go to Market Group. No one could pronounce it, but it was a short. I've tried to aim for a shorter URL, and it didn't. The name wasn't useful except in my own mind, which often happens with naming things, especially if you're a marketer. You think, oh, it's brilliant, but it wasn't as brilliant. But the thought behind it was still the right thought, which is how to help people bring things to market, right? Really and almost always in my case, it's going to be B2B. It's going to be industrial, technology, that kind of thing. So it's those kind of problems that I help people solve, really figuring it out. And professional services, again, in that category of thinking through, what am I offering, to whom am I offering it, and why should they care? Always answering those questions. So in that process, I started documenting the whole methodology of what we did when we worked with clients. And that became a very big PowerPoint presentation. It had everything that I could think of that we do. And I said, this is stuff that I'm actually doing with clients. Real project work was the gist of it. And I said, wait a second, this is a book. That turned into the big manuscript. And my friend John said, hey, it's too big. Okay, so that was the genesis. When I carved out the section I wanted to carve out, I said, this value prop seems to be the real pivotal thought. Like, you got to get this figured out well. All the other stuff, like how you do lead generation, how you do your marketing programs, all of that will change over time, as we've seen. Technology changes. I mean, when I wrote the book, social media wasn't really even a thing at that time, right? In 2008, 2009, when it came out. But the principles of value prop will always hold up, because it's always true about how you communicate with human beings about why they should give you their time and attention. So when I wrote the book, I knew the title was going to be Value Prop. Then what happened was I said, well, gee, it'd be great if I had the domain name for Value Prop. But that's a short 8-letter domain. How do you get that in 2008, 2009? They were already gone. And I found it was unused, but it was parked somewhere. And I used the buying service for the name. And I went back and forth. And one Sunday morning, driving to church, I got a text, and they said, would you take it for $500? I said,
that's pretty good.
I said, done. And so the book now had a home. But then I said, wait a second, maybe this is better for the name of renaming the company. And I was doing some other things with a new partner coming on board. And so it gave me a chance to change the corporate structure, became Value Prop Interactive. The book is Value Prop, and the domain we go to market with is valueprop.com.
Perfect. That's a great little behind the scenes there about naming and the book and the company and everything, because that does happen. I actually interviewed somebody this morning who they came out with a business and a book and everything, and they released it. And then they found out that it was trademarked and they had to change everything. They had to change the business name. They had to change the book title after it was already on Amazon. And so she had to go through this whole process. And it's tough finding names and available names. I mean, today, having a domain name is kind of like the new trademark. It's like,
it's the backdoor trademark.
I mean, if you can't get the domain name,
right,
you can't have the name. Like, you can't use the term unless you have the domain name. And so that's the first place we often go, is we say, well, is it available as a domain name? And then is anybody using this any other way? And then we go to the trademark thing and say, well, is it trademarked somewhere? But
and it even gets more challenging. You know, there are times you're tempted to say, well, maybe I can get away with the .io or .net or something else. Reality is, intuitively, people expect to hear the company name is a domain name. They just want to put it in and expect that it's a .com. So that's still the dominant thing you still have to plan for. So it's exactly right. And you have to you're shifting all these things all at once to come up with something you can actually go to market with and help you win.
Yeah. And it's tougher than ever because there is a limited number of .coms out there. I agree with you 100%. People, they forget what the extension is and then they just go to .com. Mm-hmm. So it does make it tough that way. I've had to do the IO thing sometimes, or .co, and it kills me to have to do that. But it's hard. Everything's taken these days. So when you started to work on your book, did you have prior writing experience that you could bring to that you felt like, I can do this, I can write this book? Or was it terrifying? Or what were your thoughts as you were getting started?
Yeah, I mean, at that point in my career, I mean, I did a lot of business writing, from reports to memo. You know, I was a comfortable writer, I guess I could say. I had started my blog at that time, so I was actually enjoying that process as well, finding my voice that way. So I've been blogging for a long time as well. But here's the thing. I was raising a family, still 3 kids at home at that time. And I was running a business, and I was doing a demanding executive MBA program that was of the kind that you sign up for a 2-year program and you get on the bus, you can't get off. Like, there's no partials, right? So it's basically a full course load for 2 years. And in that process, I get the idea of writing this book right in the middle of that. So how am I going to do that? And I said, well, it's got to be a way. And the first thought I had was, well, let me pursue, let's see if I can get a book treatment, run by a couple of publishers. And I had some contacts, but they all came back consistently. And these are like McGraw-Hill, John Wiley, the typical business publishers that I could think of. And he said, sure, do you have an active list with at least 30,000 names on it? And you see, I had this idea, and maybe a lot of people on this podcast listening for the first time might be thinking this too still, that publishers were like in the movies, that if they gave, there's always a movie where the guy sells a book or something, and the publisher assigns a publicist, and they're going to take care of it, and they travel you around the country, and you're going on this book tour, and they're paying for everything. And that's naive in retrospect, but I had no basis. I didn't know anything about anything. So I'm thinking, okay, and then only to find out, no, basically you got to market your own book, and you got to guarantee us like 20,000 books sold or 10,000 books sold before we even touch you. And I said, wait a second. And I said, well, and what did I get? He said, well, a first-time business published author might get, I don't know, $5,000, $10,000 advance, unless you come from like your Barack Obama or something like that, right? But for the most part, for regular humans, that's about what they're talking about. And I said, who owns the copyright? And he said, well, we do. And I said, what do you mean? You for 10 grand, I'm selling my birthright to you? I said, that made no sense to me. And then as I got deeper into it, I realized they hire freelance editors and freelance designers. And the only advantage they had that I could think of, I said, well, you're on Amazon, but I can get on Amazon, was you can get on physical bookshelves, which back in like 2008, looking towards 2010, that seemed like it's still relevant. So I said, Barnes and Nobles, Borders, that would be something to get on the bookshelves. You can't really get there without distribution through a publisher, not practically that I know of. And I said, well, that's a big trade-off, but I said, I don't know. And so I thought about it, and I've done so many projects in my life, Josh, a lot of creative projects, again, in marketing. So I said, wait a second, I'll find myself a book editor. I'll find myself a book designer. And sure enough, I put together a project team. And then I found, through a recommendation, somebody who just graduated Villanova with a 4.0 GPA, super brilliant young lady. I interviewed her once at Starbucks, and I said, here's what I want to do. I want to meet with you once a week on Monday night at 7 p.m. We're going to go through my master PowerPoint deck. And what we're going to do is I'm going to talk about it. We're going to record it. You're going to transcribe it, but I want you to apply your education and clean it up. I'll be the final editor on that before I hand it to my editor. And that's how we'll work it. So this way we can get in 1 hour. You can say a lot of words in an hour, like an awful lot of words. And we had the PowerPoint as the superstructure. So essentially I had my outline. That's essentially what we did. But I wasn't reading the PowerPoint. I was using it as launch points. And sure enough, for a year, her name is Lizzie, wonderful young lady, helped me for a year. We put together the master manuscript of the whole book before it even, and so I was able to do everything I was doing in my busy life. 1 hour a week I gave to this project, and I advanced the book every week a little bit more. And I had a big manuscript. And then the final cut, I cut it out myself in terms of the piece that would become value prop. And then I had an editor I hired that was what he did for a profession. He was a book editor, and he'd done business books, and he edited and cleaned it up greatly. And then I hired a book designer to lay it out. And then we went through, at the time, we went through Lightning Source, which is part of Ingram.
Right.
And now we're all on Amazon's KDP platform. That's just easier. Mm-hmm. But we took control of that. I said, okay, this is going to be my best piece. And I'm going to apply the same care I would if I was doing this for a client. And that was the story. That's how the book came to be.
Yeah. And now with Ingram Spark and Lightning Source, you can get onto bookshelves, not the same way that a publisher might do it, but you can get that distribution so that Barnes and Noble and such, they can, if you market it the right way, if you talk, I had somebody on before, they actually would go to the Barnes and Noble stores individually, one by one, and talk to them and say, hey, I'll come in and do an event and everything. And they would actually stock the book on their shelves. And I think they'd gotten it into 20 different Barnes and Noble. Wow. That's different from getting into every Barnes and Noble. Sure. But you can do that. And through Ingram Spark and Lightning Source, if your book does happen to take off or something, then it's at least available for them to order there that way. But yeah, the traditional publishers, what I'm seeing is that I have had people on the podcast who have said, I went through a traditional publisher and I'm glad that I did because they helped me make it a better book. And I think there's value there. Mm-hmm. Now, there are other people who say, I can make it as good as it needs to be, so I don't need a publisher. And both ways, you can respect that. The other value I've seen is for people who are so busy, there's no way they're ever going to get it done on their own, but they have enough of an audience that a publisher will come in and do the heavy lifting, do the work for them. So I can see, like, if you're famous and you've got the money and the time, or you've got the money but not the time, and a publisher will come in and say, hey, we're going to make this easy for you and we're going to do all the marketing. We actually will do the marketing, which most of the time they won't do that. I can see that. But I think we're approaching the day where the only people it will make sense for to go with a traditional publisher are going to be celebrities and blockbuster personalities, where the potential is huge. And you kind of see this with the music industry as well, that the people who are going with record labels and such, it's the blockbusters. It's the people who are the fat part of the animal. Then there's that long tail. For the long tail, it just makes sense for people to manage these things themselves.
No, absolutely. And, the way I tackled it, and I demystified it for myself this way, I said, this is a project. And many of your listeners who are professionals who offer a business service or something, I said, it's a project. So think of it like a project. It has a punch list. There's a set of activities that need to be done. Quality is everything. So you have to make sure you're comfortable that it's going out with your name on it, right? It's your ultimate business card. And that's really been the utility for me, Josh. I mean, I've gotten business from it. I'm not going to say I've made a ton of money on it in the way like a Harry Potter, or else, be a different conversation. But absolutely one of the best things I've ever done for my business life It's something I'm proud of because I think I actually gave it a lot of attention. I was careful with everything I said. It was my best ideas that I could put forth into the world. And it gave me a way to have something with authority. So when I meet a prospect and I send them I send them a note with a copy of my book, there's still something about a book. And here's the irony of it. For anyone who's listening, at least my experience, and has spent money on glossy collateral, like a nice brochure with a pocket folder, blah, blah, blah. That stuff goes right into the trash can. No one thinks about throwing away a piece of glossy collateral, which, by the way, could be a lot more expensive to produce than a book.
Yeah.
But when you send a book, we're trained, I think at least still generationally by our parents, by our upbringing, you don't throw away a book. You feel bad if you throw away a book. So a book has a permanence. Even if they don't read it right away, it's on their desk. Rarely is it going to just get tossed. So you can spend a ton of money sending fancy stuff that gets tossed, but a book will stay on their shelf for a long time. If it's a good book, it'll be read, it'll be talked about, it'll be passed along. And absolutely, again, for me, the best thing I've done for my business, probably among the very short list of 2 or 3 things I've done.
Yeah. I mean, I've thrown away a lot of junk mail in my days, but have I ever thrown away a book that came in a package to me? Absolutely not. I've gotten plenty of free books sent to me, but there's no way I'm throwing away a book. Even if I don't like it, I'll give it to somebody else.
There you go. It has intrinsic value. It's a book.
Yeah. And it's funny how you mentioned that a book can be cheaper than the collateral piece because, to produce a glossy and print 1,000 of those, you can be spending $5-6 per piece.
Easy.
Well, with a book through the self-publishing industry, because they have the scale, they've gotten the price down so low. You can print a book for $2, $3, $4 to print a whole book. And it's
pretty amazing.
Yep. So what year was it that you published your first book?
2008.
So 2008, you published your first book. Did you see a bump in business upon getting that out in the marketplace, or how did you use that? How did you leverage that to help your business?
Yeah. So first of all, it became, I still have business cards, obviously, but it became the de facto business card. After a call, after a meeting with a prospect, even if I was invited into a meeting, somebody didn't even know I wrote a book, but at the end of the meeting, where we're agreeing to have the next meeting or something like that, out of my briefcase, oh, by the way, and I'd signed and I give them the copy of the book, it has a visceral effect. They go, oh, wow, this is cool. And I'll get to it. I'll be reading it, and it stays on their desk. I don't know if they read it all the time, they glance at it, whatever they do, but it establishes me as being a consultant who, it's not that I have a book, it's that they know intuitively I took the time to organize my thoughts. So that is a risk mitigator for somebody buying services. It means the person you're buying from is thoughtful in what they do. They're not winging it. That's a powerful thought. And the book has that purpose. My biggest client for training came as a result of finding the book. And they actually read the book and they invited me to speak to a breakfast meeting that they were hosting. And that turned into several 6-figure engagements just out of that. So book is totally powerful in terms of being leveraged. Since what I sell is not necessarily like an inexpensive service, so it doesn't directly correlate volume for like this many books sold turns into this many programs sold. But I can definitely attribute over $1 million worth of business back to the book.
And that's great. It's great to be able to have that metric and be able to say, hey, I know that this is working. It's so now this book, the latest one, Value Prop, Creating Powerful I3 Value Propositions to Enter and Win New Markets. That is a mouthful. But this latest book, is this your second one, or do you have other books in between?
Yeah, so I have a book actually after this is the one. So right here, we reskinned the cover in anticipation of we're updating the manuscript itself with some updated examples and a chapter I've written on social media, how it ties into this.
So you're going to be re-releasing that one.
Re-releasing a book. It won't be, it'll just be the updated edition. In between, I took, as I mentioned, I actively blog. I wrote a book called Strategic Propositions, which is the name of my blog at that time. And I took the best of my blog posts and edited them down into a series of essays on all the entrepreneurial topics things like entrepreneurship, pricing, marketing, and so on. So they become quick essay type reads. So it's not like a book where you have to read cover to cover. It's like, hey, it's almost like a business devotional in a sense. And that's a book I'm actually very excited about as well. And it's been very helpful as a complement to this. It's more of a thought provoker than where this is more of it's actually going to show you how to do something.
Mm-hmm. Got it. And so with each book, have you seen different results or have you used it in a different way to help the business?
At this point, I've used it pretty much consistently the same way as an extension of my business development activity. Probably as I have built up my network extensively in the last couple of years in the area of experts, marketing experts, folks like you and so on over time. When I re-released the book officially, the Value Prop book, which will always be my flagship, that will get re-released in 2022. I will tie that into a lot more promotional and co-promotional activity with folks that in my network to get a much bigger reach on that. So rather than try to do that with this original edition, it made more sense to plan for that for the second edition. And that's another takeaway too, that, even if you write a book today, it doesn't mean that in 10 years you won't want to revisit it and freshen it up and so on. So that's kind of the direction we're going in.
Mm-hmm. Got it. Well, Jose, this has been great to chat with you about your book and your business. If there are people out there who want to reach out to you, either to learn more about your business or about the book, what's the best place for them to find you?
Sure. Well, they can go to valueprop.com. That's VALUEPROP.com. And they can learn all about me. They can find me on LinkedIn. And if they want actually a PDF copy of this book, if they go to valueprop.com/book, they can get a free copy right there.
This is another great reason to not go with a traditional publisher, because a traditional publisher would never let you do that. But when you self-publish, you can do whatever you want. So you can give away a PDF version of the book as a lead gen tool or grow your email list with it. But yeah, you get a traditional publisher and you say, hey, I want to do this. And they'll be like, no, you can't do that.
Or they'll let you get a chapter out maybe. But no, this is the whole book. The whole book, again, valueprop.com/book. And we're excited to offer this edition that way. To make it available to a big audience. And there's a link there if they want to buy it on as a paperback on Amazon as well.
Perfect. Jose, thanks so much for being with us here today on the show.
Well, thank you, Josh. My pleasure.
If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to spread the word, please give us a 5-star rating review and tell your friends to subscribe too. We're available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and everywhere else you listen to podcasts. And if you're an entrepreneur interested in writing and publishing a nonfiction book to grow your business and make an impact, visit publishedauthor.com for show notes for this podcast and other free resources.